Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about Cannonball by Joseph McElroy. Now I want to thank Bifurcat and Leaf by Leaf for very much pushing this author online. I've never heard of him until they mentioned him, and I'm so glad that they did because this author is amazing. He reminds me, gives me the same sensation of when I first read Joyce and Pynchon, of that what the hell is going on. I haven't had to check a plot summary for a book in a long time. It's a very beautiful and intensive author. And in terms of difficulty, I would place him pretty much up there with Pynchon and like way above Faulkner. Really no great place to start in this review. So let's just go a basic of the plot because there's a lot to cover with him. The plot, it takes place in the early 2000s, about a man going from his life, you know, helping his dad be a swim coach because he was once training for the Olympics until he got a major injury from hitting the diving board, to his experience of the Afghan war and getting caught up in a conspiracy regarding some religious scrolls, deciphering the speech of Jesus Christ. Now, he's very strange. Like, first off, he gets Southern California culture really well. He talks about all the cities around here. He talks about Oceanside, California, the place I grew up in, which is funny. The only other book to mention Oceanside is 2666 by Robert Bolano, where there's a small character who's a boxer who gave him Oceanside. But he gets the culture pretty decently over here. It's just that it's a really dusty, deserty town, and people don't realize, I think, but Southern California has a lot of military. I mean, we have one of the biggest military bases here, Camp Pendleton, just right on Oceanside. Reading it never really felt like somebody who was 80 years old. It felt somebody more from my generation. Even to the effect of talking about the Afghan war, it reminded me of a documentary I saw by Michael Moore, not Michael Moore. Going over the events and having photographers and seeing how the soldiers act in the war as well. And like they both mentioned, like seeing what music the soldiers are listening to, which is metal. McElroy handles it in a better light than more puts it as like, oh, look at these guys listen to dangerous metal music, which is kind of quaint. But to that effect, the book has a really decent realist bent and just kind of captures the essence of the time. But here's where we go into the Pynchon-y postmodern tropes. There's a lot of elements in this book that feel like it's straight out of a B movie. I'm like one of the VHSs my parents would play for me when I was a kid. So those elements, like they have this person called the inventor, who's this enigmatic person who's there for his childhood and later adulthood, who seems, who's multilingual, makes all these little trinkets and inventions and sells postcards, and just is kind of seen as a almost old sage figure for the main character. And then when they're looking up even the scrolls, he's on a special assignment to find these ancient scrolls and deliver them to the U.S. government. So you have this really realistic bent on the Afghan war, and then you're looking for these almost Indiana Jones pulpy ass scrolls in the middle of the novel. And this is what it differentiates, because Pynchon does the same thing, and he does it more for laughs, and kind of Barth does the same thing as well, where it's just like a destruction of tone. And McElroy's destroying the tone as well, but he doesn't do it to a comic effect. He plays it straight, but at the same time, you get the feeling that it's intentional as well. He's not just putting in those elements without any thought to it. He has a real purpose behind it. For what affected that purpose, I'm still not quite sure yet, because this is my first reading from him, and let me just say this, I'm going to miss a lot of things because I really need to read this book in the future, but I'm going to read a lot more of McElroy's books. It reminds me of like when I was reading Delaney's books and his sci-fi books, and I was just kind of missing something. I remember in my note review I said I feel like I'm missing something in terms of like LGBT culture in the books, and when I read Short Rumbling, it made everything else, all the other relationships in the prior books, make sense. And I'm definitely probably going to have that experience with McElroy, hopefully. Another Pynchon-y effect, or actually just kind of in postmodernism in general, I'm realizing Thoreau does the same thing, is that characters with their names reflecting either their designation in the plot or their personality. So there's one character named Jesus who's a corporal, and he helps recruit the main character and his friend Uma, who I'll talk about later, into the military. And it gets a little strange because he gives a lot of sage advice in a sense, but then it gets muddled when the scrolls are named are from Jesus as well. And now just like with the biblical Jesus, and then it's like, wait, is his name Jesus or Jesus? Because there's no hyphen on the E, so it just reads as Jesus. Another character named Storm, but it's actually Strom, but on the phone it sounds like Storm when the characters are hearing it. And so the father says like the storm's coming. And just aspects like that which help muddy the waters a bit, and I'm not entirely sure to what effect they're getting at. You know, stuff like Oedipus Mouse, which is obviously relation to like Oedipus in Crying of Lot 49, or even in Lore Warholic, where eye stones, you know, kind of go into the effect of how the main character's eyes hurt, Eugene Eyestone, and how much he reads and stuff like that. And one character even says you have stones for eyes. But for these, I guess maybe a storm is coming because Strom is like kind of antagonistic later on in the book. And you know, there's just all these strange aspects to the novel like that. The plot itself is pretty straightforward. You know, just like childhood and swimming to adulthood to a conspiracy later on, which I'll get into the spoilers. And you know, throughout it, he's trying to find his friend Umo, who is a Chinese immigrant who came through Hawaii, who was an expert diver, just kind of naturally inclined to it, just big hulking dude. And when they both join the military, they get separated, so he's spending that time to try to find him. So those elements are pretty fine, but it's just like the weird pseudo-surrealist elements that are thrown in there that, you know, while you're in the novel, you question, but it's not until you get away from it that you're like, did that really happen? And I think what adds to that fluidity of it, and which even helps it describe it and also adds to the confusion, is the prose of the novel. He has a pseudo stream of consciousness style. It's not directly in the head of the characters like it would be in Ulysses, and it's not it's not the character going through the thought process. Or it's like in Genyo's band, where it's chopped up and trying to resemble thought and memory. It's not trying to go for that effect directly, but memory is a major factor, and even future events is a major factor, and it all kind of compresses into one to create this kind of lucid state within the characters. What I mean by that is that he kind of also does the Philip Roth thing, where he doesn't mind jumping around in the timeline. So like at the beginning of the book, he'll be talking about his time in Afghanistan to when he was a kid, to even before the swim meet when he had the accident, which we don't see in the book. And you know, later on in the novel, it becomes a lot more straight during the conspiracy point of it in the third half. But you know, in the first and second, it really likes to jump around in the timeline. Adding to that, McElroy just has a very intensive style. He's not afraid to let things just kind of ride and not provide a lot of explanation for. You just kind of have to take it in with the moment. And you know, it's kind of like what Daisy Johnson does, but to just a larger extreme. And then on top of that, he'll add these weird chapters where he'll just mess with the style and just change it a lot, or like just add these weird little nuances. So for example, one chapter, all of a sudden, paragraphs starting with run-on sentences, only for that chapter. Another chapter, he has a list of events that's happening, but the list is out of order. And it's just like, why is he doing this? And it never feels like he's just being derivative for the sake of being derivative, or complicated for the sake of complicated. It's very much intentional. You can really feel that behind it, but to the effect of why, I'm not associated with McElroy's style enough to really understand that. Now I'm going to get into a slight spoiler, because this was an aspect of the novel that I got really confused on. There's a part I had to look for the summary up. So he finds Umo at one point, because he's a photographer. He's on designated to find the scrolls. It's kind of like a pseudo-secret mission. And he finds Umo about to do a cannonball into the pool. And it's the same scene from the beginning of the book, where they're at this really nice, beautiful pool that used to be a temple. And he's surprised that he sees Umo. Umo does a cannonball into the pool, and it explodes because a bomb went off at the same time. All the water rushes into the ground, into these secret underground caverns, and he gets hit with shrapnel. He goes to help a chaplain who's pinned under the debris, and the chaplain talks to him about some stuff and then gives him a piece of the scroll, and he keeps that scroll. And because he keeps that scroll, that incites the conspiracy to later on as to why that scroll is important. And then people are trying to look for him, and him and his sister might be in danger for possessing that scroll. Now, that part confused the hell out. Actually, it didn't confuse the hell out of me. I was reading it wrong. I thought it was 3 different instances in time. I thought the explosion was just happening, and he was remembering Umo jumping into the pool, and I thought the chaplains may be something later on in the novels, or maybe from a previous memory, but they're all in one. And it makes it even weirder because that's the last time you see Umo in person. He doesn't show up again, and you don't find the body. So it's like, was Umo there? Well, was he just a figment of the character's imagination? How did the chaplain get into the underground tunnels with an explosion there? How do they know why the underground tunnels under a mosque? Why didn't it destroy the scriptures completely? Why did the chaplain give it to him? And there's all these questions, and in the postmodernist tradition, there really isn't an answer, and that's not a negative. That's kind of like goes to the effect of Gravity's Rainbow, where it's like there's this almost conspiracy going on through the government throughout the novel, but no one person is directly responsible for the conspiracy. We can see Strom is the major antagonist in the second half, but he's not the one pulling the strings. He's only an effect of the situation. And you're not going to get an answer because since there's the conspiracies that are happening within the moment and more developments keep happening, one character is not going to be able to suss it out completely. Now, that just goes back more to McElroy, where even though in a lot of sense he fits within the tropes of postmodernism, with like the sillier aspects that you see in Pynchon and Barth, with the conspiratorial things that you see with Pynchon and Umberto Eco and whatnot, this is where you could see McElroy being McElroy in that sense that he follows those tropes to a degree, but you don't understand the same tropes to that way. You have to understand his personal style, because even though I'm used to that, I was confused for a lot of the novel as to some of the effects that he was trying to get at and the way that he went about it as well, which is again why I want to read a lot more of his literature and come back to this book later, because he works within the genre, but his personal style almost supersedes it as well, and that postmodernism is almost a tool for him rather than the means for him to get to where he wants to achieve. And there's also an aspect of incest in the book as well, where he develops a relationship with his sister, and it's taken as a way where it's pretty sweet and pretty beautiful. It almost reminds you of Short Rumbling in the sense that it's not played for disgusting aspect. There is a recognition that it is seen wrong by others, like the father kind of walks in on them or he walks in on them when he's leaving her bedroom, and he's like, what the hell? But it just kind of goes to the nonconformity of the sexual canons, and that hey, even though it's his sister, there was a beautiful relationship there, and even though it doesn't last near the end of the novel and he finds a new boo, there was a very special bond there, one that they really both respected themselves. And the sister, she's not just a sexual object in the novel. She plays a big role with helping decipher the conspiracy as well. But it also does a great job of, comparing her life experiences to his, and the family dynamic between her and the father and the mother, and his between the father and the mother as well. Now, some of the stuff I might talk about might seem like points against the novel, but they really aren't. McElroy just handles it in such a beautiful way. His prose is just so amazing, and it was a subject matter I didn't think I'd be that interested in, and even the name of the book, Cannonball, it was more, I just got this book just to get a foray into McElroy, but it's one of those things where it's like, it was so beautiful, it was just so great, and just to see him play with language, play with literature, play with the temporal aspect of literature, in that memory and time, just kind of intermix and kind of all condensed as the one, and in the spatial aspect where he can add all these odd elements into it, but the plot doesn't become unbelievable. You walk away with a real sense of the time that it happened in as well, and just the aspect that kind of like what Pynchon did with Bleeding Edge, McElroy really, even though he's 80 years old, he really gets a sense of the time. Even with Alexander Thoreau and Laura Warhol, sorry, the book's over there, even though it's writing about like 2,000 cultures, again, like this one, by an 80-year-old man, I think he's probably 70 at that time, it really doesn't feel that way. It feels like from somebody who understands the time, who really took time to invest into the current culture, even though it's not his own. Which is really the mark of an incredible author, who's able to write about times that happened so much later than yours, and is even still youth-centric, and able to understand that and see where it's coming from, but also able to criticize it as well, and not from a point where it feels like some old man yelling at clouds, but from a point where even somebody who grew up in that time can agree with the criticism. And McElroy does all of that: compelling plot, compelling characters, strange pseudo-surrealist elements, postmodernist ideology, the effects of history, the effects of culture of the time, and all packaging it into like this dense, fluid, intensive prose that doesn't want to hold your hand. And being somebody who loves complicated literature, I do put him up there with Pynchon, I think. It's tough to say just because this is a shorter book and the only one I've read from him, but like, goddamn, it was this intensive, and I hadn't struggled with a book like this in a long time. I read Sound and Fury earlier this year. There was only really one chapter that really got to me, and the only other part that really got to me was like the characters having similar names, but just the thought process of this book, which is so much more intensive. It reminded me of like the beginning of Gravity's Rainbow, where the siren is going off and they all have to leave the building and everything, and it's almost like that throughout the whole book. Sometimes authors can just have the beginning with certain parts difficult, and the whole process of the book is just so intensive and just really requires a close reading. So I definitely recommend Cannonball. Oh, little fun side note, the Cannonball has to deal with multiple analogies in the book, like so Cannonball jumping into the water, the cameras that he's using to film, and then like this cannonball strewn across the land. It's a little cheating, but at the same time not really, because they are in a war time zone. So yeah, Cannonball by Joseph McElroy. Definitely gonna read more of him. I'm gonna try to read all of his works. I know Lookout Cartridge and the Something of History are both pretty easy to find, and I can buy Men and Women. But if anybody has a copy of Plus, let me know. I'll buy that off of you. I've seen it for like well over $100. So if you have it for like $50 or less, I'll spend the money. Or if you have any of his other books that are more difficult to find, hit me up. I'll be happy to purchase them off of you for a decent price. I don't want to screw you over also, but yeah, Joseph McElroy, who cares? Definitely recommend. Check out Cannonball. I'm gonna be reading this author. He's crazy and amazing.